you guys. I'm always really mindful of saying you guys, because not everybody here is a guy. So I say y'all, because it's just isn't it good? It's just all inclusive. We're all inclusive here. So how y'all doing this morning? It's lovely to be here. This is my third time in Portland, I think, and every other time I've been here, bad things have happened. So nothing bad has happened yet. So third time's a charm, and we're going to bring nothing bad happens. But it is really lovely to be here, and one of the things that I really want to get out of the way, I mean, this is really something, what I'm going to be talking about today is, of course, I think helpful for wherever you are on the spectrum, wherever you are in terms of how you eat and where you are. Of course, if you're already vegan, I think this is helpful for you in terms of communicating it to non-vegans, and of course, if you're not vegan or vegetarian, hopefully this information will inspire you. So one of the things I really like to get out of the way first is that so that we're all on the same page is that we understand what vegan food is, because there tends to be some misconceptions about vegan food. We tend to have this notion that there's like normal food and regular food over here, real food we call it, and then there's vegan food over here, like it's its own separate food group. You ever hear that, right? And we say that in our language too. We even do that ourselves, even as vegans, we tend to talk about it as fake food versus real food, and really in reality, vegan food is fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and beans and mushrooms and grains and herbs and spices. Is that familiar to everybody? Has everybody heard of those things, right? It's just food we're already familiar with, food that we already love, food that we already cook with. We don't say, could I have a vegan apple, please? It's not like vegan bananas and like bananas. There's just like bananas, right? And vegans are really guilty of this too. I have a lot of vegan friends, my husband's vegan, and we're also guilty of saying things like, so I was at this vegan restaurant last night and I had this vegan cake and the vegan food was really good. I'm like, I know it's vegan, like you're vegan and you were at a vegan restaurant, so we don't have to keep saying the word vegan, like overuse the word vegan, right? So among ourselves, I think we can just talk about it as food, and I think even just the way we communicate that to the public really makes a difference in terms of how they then perceive vegan food, because it does then appear that it's something different and separate. Does that make sense? Okay, so I just want to get that out of the way and just establish that. So my name is Colleen Gudreau, and the mission in my work is to empower people to make informed food choices, to debunk myths about veganism, to be a voice for animals, and to give people the tools and resources they need to live according to their own values of compassion and wellness. I'm not asking anybody to live according to my values. I'm urging people to live according to their own values, which I know they already have and want to live by. And we see people making changes all the time. We see people making changes in this direction and getting rid of meat, dairy, and eggs. We see that happening all the time, and I'm incredibly encouraged by that. People are doing it for a number of reasons. They're doing it for health reasons. They're doing it because they don't want to contribute to violence against animals. They're doing it because they don't want to contribute to the destruction of the rainforest. They're doing it because they don't want to contribute to slaughterhouse workers being so desensitized to their own compassion. They do things to the animals, which are the stuff of nightmares and horror movies that we don't even want to look at. People are doing it because they don't want to contribute to the huge number of resources it takes to turn living beings into butchered bodies. So pick a reason, and any one of them is reason enough to make this change. And we see people making these changes all the time. And yet, we also see people struggle. And we see people want to, but then make these excuses or have these blocks or think they can't do it. We see people try it and then they give up, they stop. And so why? What is it? Why are people inclined to make these changes that they know are so hugely beneficial for themselves and for so many other reasons, but still wind up struggling and not wind up following through, etc.? There are a number of reasons. We could just talk specifically about those reasons. One of them is we live in a culture where we're given the message we should consume as much meat, dairy, and eggs as possible, constantly, through advertising and marketing and internet ads and radio and television. And wherever you look, you're given this message that we should consume as much meat, dairy, and eggs as possible. I'm so sorry, I know I speak very quickly. Okay. I'll try to slow down. So we're given this message that we should consume as much meat, dairy, and eggs as possible. We live in a world that doesn't make it easy for us to make the most compassionate and healthful choices, right? People say, I'm in Idaho and I can't find a potato. I guess you can find potatoes. But I can't find other vegetables in Idaho. Like, it's not the fault of being vegan that you can't find kale in Idaho. Like, that's a whole other issue. But it's not made easy for us. So people in Idaho should be able to get kale. If you're from Idaho, should get kale. We But you get the idea. We talk about how there's places around the world where you can't eat vegan. You can't get plants? Like, that's not okay. But that's not the fault of veganism, and that's not something vegans have to solve. Those are bigger issues around food policies and food politics, etc. But the point is that we're constantly, it's made difficult for us to make the most compassionate choices. We live in a world where, in many ways, animal exploitation is considered normal, and it's okay, and it's supported. And we look upon those who oppose animal abuse with suspicion and sometimes hostility. And a lot of us can identify with that. A lot of us can identify with what it's like to come into this world innately compassionate. Right? I think a lot of us can identify with that process of going from innately compassionate to desensitized to our compassion, or at least having that compassion dulled and put to sleep. I was a typical kid. There was nothing special about me. I loved animals. I had animals all over my pajamas, not animals themselves, images of animals, images of animals on my pajamas, on my clothing, on my lunch boxes, on my wallpaper, on my bedspread, stuffed animals on my bed. I was read books that used animals to teach me how to read, to teach me how to count, to teach me how to spell, to teach me how to be a respectful member of society. In every way, I was given the message that animals are a huge part of our development and our lives. And then at the same time, I was being fed animals. The same animals whose images were all over my room that my parents were supporting. They were supporting that. And in feeding me animals, they weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to help me. They thought it was the right thing to do because that's what they had known, that's what they had learned themselves. And so what started to happen is I was taught to compartmentalize my compassion. I was taught to compartmentalize the animals. Those are the animals we love. Those are the animals we eat. Those are the animals we test on. Those are the animals we use, right? And so what happens is that the taste for the fat and flesh of animals became part of my palate, became part of my habit. And I learned to put that compassion to sleep. It was still there, but it wasn't as fierce and unconditional as it had once been. And that's something all of us can identify with. And then when I started looking to not consuming animals and animal secretions, my parents didn't react the same way as when I wanted to help dogs and cats. They didn't react the same way. So we're taught this kind of split, right? This cognitive dissonance. And so we're taught that we should choose convenience over compassion. We're taught that we should choose the status quo over our own ethics, right? And so as a result, with all of these messages that we get from society, marketing and advertising, and our parents, etc., ultimately we have all these blocks that then keep us from actually doing what we say we want to do. Blocks around nutrition, around food, around the animals, around so many different issues that actually then stop people from doing what they want to do. Nutrition is a huge one. Obviously, we hear it all the time, right? The problem is that we were taught that the nutrients we need are animal-based, right? That's what we were taught. And we're still teaching this all the time. We are taught that the nutrients we need are animal-based. If I were to ask you where we're supposed to get our calcium from, you would say,
kale land.
No, you weren't taught. No, you weren't. Maybe these days some people are being taught that. But we're not taught that, right? We know that, but we weren't taught that. We were taught that calcium comes from cow's milk, right? Animal's milk. We were taught that omega-3 fatty acids come from fish, and we were taught that protein comes from meat, dairy, eggs, kind of all of the animal products, right? Everyone's obsessed with protein. Everyone is so obsessed with protein. It's a joke, right? I mean, it's a joke. We all know this. Everyone's obsessed with protein. I need protein. Get your protein. I need my protein. Protein. Everyone's so obsessed with protein. Everyone's so obsessed with protein, yet no one can tell you what protein deficiency looks like. Because if you meet someone who say, I tried to be vegetarian, but I needed my protein, and I needed too much protein, you say, well, what did that look like, that you needed your protein? I don't know, I just needed it. I just needed my protein. Well, how did you know you needed the protein? Well, my body told me. Like, did your body email you? Like, what did your body say that you think you needed protein? Well, I don't know, I was tired. Well, tired, that's not protein deficiency. Yeah, I don't know, you know what my doctor said? I was anemic. Okay, that's iron deficiency. That's not protein deficiency. But this is what people do. Everyone's obsessed with it and thinks they have it, but no one can tell you what it looks like, right? Right? Do me a favor, could you raise your hand? Just want to make sure you're awake, first of all. Raise your hand if you've heard of heart disease. Raise your hand if you've heard of diabetes. If you know someone who's on cholesterol-lowering medication, if you know someone who's on blood pressure-lowering medication, awesome. Raise your hand if you know someone with kwashiorkor. Kwashiorkor? Raise your hand if you know, isn't there a kwashiorkor ward in the the local hospital here? Any kwashiorkor specialists in the room? You'd think we'd know someone with kwashiorkor. Kwashiorkor is a scientific term for protein deficiency. So you'd think we'd know someone with kwashiorkor. We're so obsessed with protein deficiency, right? We've never met anybody. There are cardiac wards in the hospital. There are diabetes wards and cancer wards. There's not a kwashiorkor ward because we don't have diseases of deficiency. We've seen people with kwashiorkor when we see people who are starving in countries where they're not able to get any food and so they're not getting any protein. We see it in developed nations only when someone's quite literally starving by starving themselves, when people have anorexia or when they're so sick they're not eating. But for the most part, we don't have diseases of deficiency. All of those things that you were familiar with, those are diseases of excess. That's what we have no business dying from, and that's what people are dying from. But we don't have diseases of deficiency. Anybody with scurvy in the house? Anybody with beriberi, rickets? Nobody? No rickets specialist? No. That's not what our problem is, right? So the question isn't where do vegans get their protein? The question is why have we all been taught that we need to go through the animals to get to the nutrients that the animals get because the animals eat plants. The nutrients we need are plant-based. The only nutrient we need that's not plant-based is vitamin B12, but it's not animal-based either. It's formed on bacteria. So the nutrients we need are plant-based. We need to skip the middle animal and go directly to the source. And when we do, we skip the animal-based saturated fat, we skip the dietary cholesterol, we skip the problematic animal protein, and when we go right to the plants, we get the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants, the fiber, the folate, all of the nutrients we need that originate in plants. If an animal product has any fiber, it's because the animal ate fiber. There's no fiber in animal products. If they have any antioxidants, an egg, antioxidants, it's because they ate plants. So we need to skip the middle animal and go directly to the source. Does that make sense? Because right now what we're doing is going through the animal. And this is just something that people really can understand. This is not like my opinion. And this is not some special theory that if you do it this way and you dance a little bit and spin around, you're going to be vegan and you're going to be really healthy. This is just like common sense, right? So when you say to someone, why are we going through the animals? They get it. They just never thought about it that way before. And so in skipping the middle animal, we're skipping the resources that it takes to go through the animal because it makes no sense to use all these resources to get to the nutrients that the plants have, right? And you can look at calcium as an example of that, right? Everybody, first of all, what's calcium? Mineral. It's a mineral. There's some Chicago. Nothing. They didn't even know. They didn't even know it's a mineral. Chicago, I say. All right, so it's a mineral. And where are minerals found? In the ground. Chicago? Just saying. So it's a mineral that's found in the ground. And why does cow's milk have calcium in the milk? Why does cows have calcium in the milk? Because they eat grass. Theoretically. Because 3 out of 4 cows are not eating grass. It does not make sense financially to have cows grazing and then bring them back 3 times a day to milk them in the milking parlor, right? So they're not grazing, they're not eating grass. And so that the dairy industry can live up to the marketing claims that it's a high calcium food, what are they doing to the feed of the cows? They're supplementing it with calcium. You can supplement your feed with calcium. You can supplement your feed with calcium, or you could just go directly to the plants and get your calcium, right? Because instead, what we're doing is going through this animal that starts with a living being, a lot more resource intensive than kale, right? You start with a living being, and then you have to have this living being pregnant. And I remember when I first found out that cows have to be pregnant in order to lactate. And I felt really stupid because I was a smart, intelligent young woman, but nobody had encouraged me to understand that in order to lactate, she has to be pregnant. And we don't even say they lactate, we say they give milk. That's the language we use, right? As if they come into the world ready to bestow upon humans their nutritional gifts, right? That's why I'm here for that. And so no one encourages us, and then we think there's some retirement spot at the end of this cycle. That's what we're encouraged to believe. And in reality, they are pregnant, they're pregnant for 9 months, and at the end of that 9 months, all she wants is her baby. Humans do not have the market on maternal instincts and affection. At the end of that 9 months, all she wants is her baby, but she's not allowed to keep her baby. As you know, she her baby's taken away. If he's male and 50% are, he's killed right away, or he's chained up for 16 weeks for veal. And if she's female, she goes into the same servitude as her mother. And then, of course, she's killed after 4 or 5 years because her production slowed down and she's no longer profitable. Because that's the bottom line, right? And of course, cows can live 20 to 25 years. I've known Dawn at Farm Sanctuary up in Orland, or down in Orland, for 15 years. She's probably like 22 years old now. And she's still the matriarch. She's just absolutely amazing. So 20, 25 years is how long these animals can live. But we kill them after 4 years. For what? For calcium that we can just get from the plants, right? So why? Why are we doing this? Why did we pick cows? Why cow's milk? What's so special about cow's milk that makes it so conducive for human consumption? What do cows have in common with goats, have in common with sheep, have in common with camels? These are all the animals we milk, right? What do these animals have in common?
Herding animals.
They're herd animals. And as herd animals, they're easy to control. And they're easy to keep together. Because if we wanted the highest amount of calcium in an animal's milk, we would be drinking hyena's milk, because it's really high in calcium. But you see, there's a problem with that business plan. They kill you if you try to impregnate them, or take their babies, or take their milk. So the point is, that's how arbitrary it is. That it has nothing to do with the condition of the milk, and everything to do with the condition of the animals, the nature of the animals rather than the nature of the milk. Does that make sense? Right? So that's how arbitrary it is. So in skipping the middle animal, we're skipping all of that intensive resources, we're skipping all of the, the inherent exploitation. There's no way around impregnating a female. And if I were to suggest that we start a market of human milk, everyone's disgusted by that. Our own species milk, and I'm not suggesting this because I'm not or anything. Everyone's disgusted. We're disgusted at the idea of, there's jokes about that all the time. There's like sitcom episodes, like drinking like his wife's milk by accident, right? But we've been persuaded that consuming another animal's milk is completely normal and natural, right? So skip the middle animal, go directly to the source. We'll go directly to the green leafy vegetables, and we let go of all of this stuff. It's just that simple. And in terms of absorption, because nutrients are not just about taking them in, it's also about absorbing them. And when it comes to absorbing the calcium from cow's milk, you absorb about 30%. When it comes to absorbing the calcium from green leafy vegetables, it's between 50 and 60%. So which do you want, right? I mean, that's, again, just logic. It's not even my opinion. So the nutrients we need are plant-based, and the diseases that we're suffering from are diseases of excess, not diseases of deficiency. Does that make sense? So those are some of the myths that we carry around nutrition. You can do that with omega-3 fatty acids. You can do that with all of the nutrients. You can break it down to the fact that the animals are eating the plants, right? Then other myths we have, there are so many around food and cooking, and a lot of them stem from the fact that we have this kind of perception of ourselves, and then we have reality. So it's not even just the food, it's just our self-perception. Because I've never met one person who hasn't said, I don't eat a lot of meat, when I've said I'm vegan. I have never met anyone who doesn't say, I don't eat a lot of meat, I don't eat a lot of dairy. Nobody has said, I eat so much, it's ridiculous. Like, nobody said that. Everyone has this perception that they don't consume a lot. And the truth is, you don't know how much you eat until you stop. You don't know how much you do of anything until you stop, right? That's when you're able to recognize your habits for the first time, and that's ultimately what this is. Everything we do, everything we eat, every food we choose, the way we plate our food, these are all habits. These are all cultural habits, and they're familial habits, and they're societal habits, but they're habits, which means they're meant to be broken. And so doing something like the 30-Day Vegan Challenge, which is the whole concept of saying stop long enough to recognize what your habits are and to change them. Because ultimately what's happening is that we're looking in the same direction our whole lives, making the same food choices, going to the same restaurants, eating the same foods again and again and again and again, right? And we don't even know if there's like things over there because we're not looking over there. And so you do something like the 30-Day Vegan Challenge, you stop long enough to go, I'm gonna have a burger, this is what you're used to, and you go, wait, I'm not doing that. What's over here? There's like cuisines and foods and ingredients and flavors I've never tried before. And it gives you the opportunity for the first time to actually make those changes. Because I really do believe, and I would say this unapologetically, that being vegan is effortless, but making the transition is difficult for people. It's this part right in between going from here to here. That's the transition that's difficult for people. And I don't care why, and it doesn't matter to me, but I'm going to do everything I can to make that transition easier for them so that when they look over here, it's more familiar. And and they can stand on a foundation so that they can feel confident and joyful and experience the abundance of living vegan. But the problem is we have all of these myths around cooking and time and food and all of the problems people complain about. I'm too tired, I don't have time to cook, I don't have time to cook. The problem is the barometer for how much time it should take to cook something in our kitchen right now is about 0. Like, any more time than 0 minutes is way too long, right? That's just too long. I don't have time for that, right? So the problem is we have to change our barometer from 0. Like, can we do better than 0? Like, that's all I ask of people. Can we do a little better than 0? Can we do 5 minutes? Can we do 15 minutes, right? And I think we can. Because I think ultimately we do have the time. Anything we think is so much more important than actually making the food that's going to nourish us and our families, we're not going to have if we're not here to enjoy it, right? So if we don't have time to be sick, then we have to make time to be healthy. So we have to make that decision, right? But I ultimately think we do have the time. I think we don't make the time, but we do have the time. We decide all the time how we want to spend our time, right? Everybody complains they don't have time to cook, I'm so busy. And yet we have time to get in a car and drive to a restaurant, look for a parking spot, and wait for a table, sit down, decide what to order, wait for the food, wait for the check, and drive back home again. We probably have some time to chop some vegetables. Does that make sense? So I don't buy it. We decide all the time how we want to spend our time. And it doesn't have to take that much time. It doesn't have to take that much. And grocery stores have figured it out. They're like chopping vegetables for us. Because people are like, I don't want to chop the vegetables. So the stores are chopping them for us, okay? And we decide then, okay, I'll spend more money rather than time. And that's okay. If it means it's going to get vegetables into your body, then fine. That's okay. And you can do it yourself as well. You can chop the vegetables. If you are making a recipe that calls for 1 onion, chop 2 onions. You've got the cutting board out, you've got the knife out, and put 1 in the fridge and then put 1 in the recipe, right? Thinking in advance, before you put the vegetables in the refrigerator, chop them first. We have this block, if we see the carrots with their tops on. Like, really? Like, you know how long it takes to take like a head of broccoli and like turn it into florets? Like, a minute. So that's why I'm asking us to just raise the bar from 0. A minute, right? So we can chop them. And when we chop them first and then put them in like bags and, containers, then when we open the fridge to cook, we're like, oh my God, it's all chopped up. I'm gonna make something stir fried. It's there, right? It makes a huge difference. So chop the vegetables before you put them in the refrigerator. Always think in advance to do that. And then people say, I'm not letting the vegetables go bad. I have to stop the vegetables go bad. I go bad. I put them in my fridge. Because we're treating our refrigerators like compost bins and like storage units. The trick to making sure your vegetables don't go bad is to eat them. Take that tip home with you and share that with your loved ones. Eat them and they won't go bad, okay? Because that's the point. I've had people literally say to me, I figured out this trick, I know how to keep my vegetables in the refrigerator for weeks. Why are the vegetables sitting in the refrigerator for weeks? Like, you should be eating them, okay? So eat the vegetables, right? And then people complain, I've heard every excuse. You've heard these excuses, then people complain, but the vegetables, I heard they lose their enzymes and they're going to lose some of the nutrients if you chop them in advance and put them in the refrigerator. Here's another tip for you. Vegetables chopped in advance have more nutrition than no vegetables at all. Okay? So enough with the excuses. When people confront you with these excuses, that's what we say. All right? Does that make sense? All of these excuses that we make, we're the ones stopping ourselves. We're the ones sabotaging ourselves from actually making the changes we say we want to make. Right? And then you've got the people who say things like, well, I tried being vegetarian, I tried, but I was craving meat. Anybody ever hear that? Anybody ever say, raise your hand? Maybe you said it. It's okay, look someone in the back's like, good for you, that's very courageous. Everybody said it. And we use this word crave, and I put it in quotes because we tend to use the word crave when we want to add credibility to what's really a desire. Right? Because it's so much different to say something like, I'm really craving a steak versus I really want a steak. Right? I mean, it's that whole, like, my body needs it. And it's so much more noble to say, well, it's my body. Like, I'm not involved in this at all. Like, I completely relinquish responsibility. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't want it, but my body made me do it. I had to eat the steak, right? That's ultimately what we do. So we use that word crave when we want to, like, lend credibility to that. When in reality, we're it. That's all it is. It's because that's what we're familiar with. And so we use this word, I tried to be vegetarian, and I just craved meat. The truth is we do not crave other animals. We are not obligate carnivores. We do not consume animals because we have to. We consume them because that's what we're used to. If you want to know what it looks like to crave the flesh of another animal, think about what a domestic cat looks like. Have you ever seen a domestic cat see a bird? Completely, you're gone from the room, like you're not even there. They focus, their eyes dilate, their tail starts to flicker, they start to drool a little bit, make little chirpy sounds. Is that how you get when you see a bird flying by you? Is that how you get when you see cattle or deer grazing on the side of the road? Right? I know you're all like delayed because you're all picturing that. No, because we are not lions on the plain who like see a gazelle run by and we're like, yes, it's lunchtime. Like that's just not what we do. We are not obligate carnivores. We do not crave the flesh of other animals. We don't even react that way if we see an animal who's been hit by a car on the side of the road. We usually feel disgust and then we feel compassion. We don't take out our forks and start thinking about lunch, right? So we don't crave the flesh of other animals, but we do crave fat, salt, flavor, texture, and familiarity. And these things play a huge role in the emotional connection we have with food. These play huge familiarity. Why do you think food scientists are spending so much money trying to replicate the things that we're familiar with, right? So that we can have the same shapes and textures and flavors that we're familiar with. We don't crave foods we've never had before. We crave the things that we've had before. That's why the hot dogs and the burgers and the chicken, like that's why, because the familiarity plays a huge role in our desire for eating, right? And so if it's so when people say to me, I was craving a burger and I had to eat the burger, I say to them, you weren't craving a burger, you were probably craving fat and salt and probably some familiarity. And they go, you're right. Because I remember the time I had a veggie burger that my friend made for me, and I had the avocado and the ketchup and the onions and the relish, and it was just, it was great because it had the fat, the salt, and the familiarity, right? So when you can get people to just kind of shift a little bit, to think a little differently about it, and if they are indeed craving fat, quotation marks, then we could have an avocado, we could have have guacamole, we could have some nuts, we could have some nut butter, we could have some seeds. I mean, there are so many ways to get fat, but not from the animal products. The problem is we were told that it's the meat, dairy, eggs that we want, not that it's the fat, salt, familiarity, flavor, and texture that we want. And so we go right for the familiar rather than saying, no, it's salt. I'll just put a little salt on my food, or it's familiarity, or it's the texture, it's the flavor, right? Anybody have spices in their house, right? Anybody have dust collecting on those spices, the little tops, right? Right. And so then you have people who express, and people say, I tried vegan food, but it's a little bland, like I just want some flavor in your food. And I said, really, what do you flavor your hot dogs with? What do you flavor your hamburgers with? You flavor it with the onions and the relish and the barbecue sauce and the ketchup and the mustard. Those are plants. We flavor our meat with plants, okay? Because the flavor is in the plant foods. So if it's flavor, use those spices. Use the spices, use the herbs, right? Because ultimately that's where the flavor is. So those are some more excuses we use. And we need to be able to talk back to each other and say, no, that's not what it is. Here's what it is, and here's how you can then solve it. Identify what the craving is and then meet it with plant foods. Does that make sense? And then you get people who say things like, I get it. I saw a video. I don't want to be part of it. I don't want to contribute to this. I could stop eating everything, but I could never give up X. And the X is usually cheese, right? You've heard that before. Interesting. I've heard that too down in California. Amazing. We all hear the same things, right? I could give up everything, but I could never give up cheese. And I say, what are you eating now? They say everything. And I said, you just said you could give up everything, but you could never give up cheese. So give up everything except for cheese. Start somewhere. It doesn't make any sense to do nothing because you think you have to do everything. And if you think you can't do everything, then you do nothing. That is complete self-sabotage. Don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do something, anything. Every step we take will bring us closer to the people we say we want to be and to the animals we say we want to help. But to sabotage ourselves and not do anything at all because we think we have to do everything, it doesn't make any sense. And I think ultimately what happens is, related to that, is the biggest misconception about being vegan, and please, if there's anything you walk away with today, walk away with this, is the biggest misconception about being vegan is that people think being vegan is an end in itself. the goal. Being vegan is not the goal. You don't get a certificate when you become vegan. And when you attach that kind of significance to that, when you think it's the end, you get hung up in the perfection, you get hung up in the purity of it, and you think that's what it's about. That's not what it's about. Being vegan is a means to the end. Being vegan is the means to the goal. And that goal is unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. That's the goal. Vegan is the way to get there, right? But ultimately, people get so hung up on the purity and perfection, and they wind up doing nothing at all, and then they wind up not making the changes they want to make and not making the difference they want to have, right? Because everybody says they want to make a difference. Everybody says they want to affect change. Everybody says they want to have meaning in this world and do something significant. And yet I think people forget that in order to make a difference, you may have to do something different. You may have to do something different. Because ultimately, we're sabotaging ourselves and realizing that nothing's getting done if we don't do anything at all. So all I ask is that we remain open, never say never, embrace the journey that encourages us to learn new things and try new things and make better choices, more compassionate choices once we know better. Because what I know for sure is that the problems we have in this world are not because we have so much compassion we don't know what to do with it. The problems we have in this world are because we're not living according to our own values of compassion and kindness. Most of us will say that we're against cruelty and exploitation and violence. Most of us are, right? Most of us would say that. But how many of us actually live according to those values, to those ethics of compassion and kindness? And I'll leave you with this, because ultimately, in the end, people might say, well, do you really think it matters? Do you really think it can make a difference? Do you really think people can make a difference? And my answer is no. I don't think people can make a difference. I know people do make a difference. Everything we do makes a difference. Everything we say, everything we buy, everything we eat has an impact on someone or something else. We don't get to decide whether we can make a difference or not. We get to decide only if the difference we inevitably make is negative or positive. That's it. Those are our only two choices. There are no neutral actions. And so that's my challenge to everybody I talk to, is my challenge to everybody, is my hope is that we, each of us, reflect in our daily choices our deepest values and realize that with each bite we take, with every decision we make, we can actually create the compassionate world we say we want to live in. And may it be so. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for We do have time for some questions, I believe. I don't have my phone.
Yeah, the mic is right up there. If anyone would like to ask a question, please come step on up. We've got about 15 minutes for questions.
Thank you.
First, I want to say you're a wonderful public speaker.
Thank you. Yeah.
My son and his wife moved from Southern California to Portland so that the wife could attend the renowned naturopathic school here. And during the course of her studies, she did become a naturopath. She decided that meat is an important component of a healthy diet, much to my dismay, because my son was raised a vegan. So I wonder, is it the case that there's no such thing as settled science in the realm of nutrition?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, and thank you. Yeah, absolutely, and I know that happens a lot. You know, we want to have one answer for this, right? We want to say that doctors who are telling their patients that they should consume animals, well, you know, MDs who are doing that, they only have 1 hour of nutrition during medical school, and it's easy to write that off and say they're not nutritionists, like they don't. But then you get people who go to nutrition school, and they go, especially for alternative medicine, when they go to, you know, for naturopathy, is that the word? And for acupuncture and all of that. And they're taught that they need to consume animals, and that's what they're passing on to their clients. So look, you can find anything you want to support anything you want. Like, you're going to find information to support everything that backs up what you already want to believe. And that doesn't mean that, like, you know, the person who goes to that school is like looking to just completely defend and confirm, thank you, lost my words, what they already know, but that's ultimately what happens. So no, there is absolutely no one answer when it comes to nutrition. But that's why I say to you, don't go by theories. Like, I eat food, I don't eat concepts, okay? I don't eat concepts. But what we're doing and everything out there, all this information that we're hearing from people are these concepts and these theories. That's why I said, don't listen to me. This is common sense. This has nothing to do with do this and then turn around and dance and like eat this with this and combine this and it's only at 3 o'clock in the morning and you can't. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, we should just be eating food and not be so obsessed with this. But look, when people are suffering and they're having ailments, they want to find answers. They're willing to hear whatever someone has to say about it if they think it's going to make them feel better. And then what happens, and we do this too as vegans, is something you make a change and then you attribute everything that happens in your life to that one change you make, right? And so, I became vegan yesterday, and then today I lost some hair. Well, it's not because you went vegan that like some hair came out of your head, right? But you want to make that kind of correlation all the time, and we're doing it all the time. And then we agree with it too. And it's one of the reasons that I have a really hard time with even in the vegan community, people making promises about what will happen when you become vegan. Here's the answer. You stay human. Someone says to me, do you get sick? Okay, do you still get sick? Yes, I'm human. Like, you don't stop being human when you become vegan. Like, you become a better human, but you don't stop being human, right? And so we make these promises and we set these expectations up for people, and then they get sick, or something happens because they're human, and then they put it all on being vegan. So that was a very long answer, but you get the idea. You can find an answer for everything you want, and that's why I am not a fan of all of that. I'm just a fan of what common sense is, and that's why I say the nutrients we need are plant-based. It's that simple, and we want to increase our absorption of those nutrients. I mean, it's that simple. So I don't know if I answered your question. I can just feel your frustration. I know that it's really difficult to experience that. So I will send out all the good vibes that they will get the information they need so that they can reflect what the values that we talked about. Yes.
Thanks. I'm wondering how you would respond when people bring up hunting. I've heard people say when the topic of being vegan comes up, like, oh, well, I agree that the way we raise animals in factory farms is terrible. Of course, these are always people that haven't stopped eating those animals, but they'll acknowledge that it's terrible. But then, but I think hunting is okay. Like, if you eat animals that you went out and killed yourself out in the woods, like that is somehow okay. And I'm never quite sure how to respond to that, because I feel like there is such a great difference in values, and trying to point them back to living in line with their deepest values like you're talking about. Sometimes I really question if those people have the same values as me. I wonder if it's maybe just sort of like some fantasy to want to think that everybody actually has the same values and compassion that you like, because some people really sometimes kind of act like they don't.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Thank you for that really articulate question. So absolutely. So when I talk about the values that I believe that most people have and share, I'm not talking about sociopaths, because there's a difference, right? But that's a pretty small minority, because I would ask that person who talks about hunting what it was like when they were first taught to hunt. And I bet they were a child, and I bet their father took them out, and I bet they were shamed into not being a sissy girl crying when they have to shoot that animal for the first time. Everybody who is taught to kill is taught to be desensitized to that killing. So I do believe that they're compassionate, but that compassion was dulled, just like ours is, in a more dramatic way. But I think every person who was taught to hunt will tell you it was really hard. And they had to really suppress how hard it was for them to do it. And then after you do it a few times, it's not as hard anymore. And that's the truth. Now, if they have no compunction about killing, that's a sociopath, and that's a problem, right? So we have a problem with people who have no compunction about it, because that's not where they're at. They would say it was difficult. And now it's not as difficult anymore, because it's just become second nature. So when someone says, that's one thing. The second thing is when someone says that to me, I would put it back on them and say, what does that have to do with what we're doing now? Because do you think every single person should know what? We just let all the pigs go and we all shoot them? Like, do they think everybody should have a gun and shoot them? We're not in the kind of hunting-gatherer society we used to be in. We have billions of people in the world. It's not going to happen. We're not going to return to that. So I would put it back on them and say, so what's your point? Because ultimately what they want to say is, I'm aligning myself with compassion. I don't think what we do over here is okay, but I think what we do over here is okay, because this is a more noble way to do it. So they're already agreeing with you that this is not okay, so you've already got some common ground. And that's what I would encourage you to speak to. I would ask them what it was like for them when they first, ask them their story. It's difficult to hear, but ask them what it was like for them when they first learned how to hunt. And I bet you they would say it was difficult. Ask them, okay, so you're on the same page, we all agree that that's not the best way. And here's the thing, most people, maybe it's different up here in Oregon, but most people do not eat only animals they've killed. They're going to restaurants and they're going to people's houses, and you think they say, no, I'll just have the potatoes because I didn't kill that animal. They're still doing things and contributing to things that they just said they don't agree with. So my point in saying all that is what it does is deride us from the point. And what it does is like, did I say deride? Derail. And then it's derided. It derails us from the point. And we then get carried away, well, maybe it is better. You know, it is better than factory farming. Well, that's a low bar. You know, like that's a low bar. Like you can't get any lower than that. So okay, we agree to that. Do you know what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is find the common ground with them. And don't get distracted by, well, this is better than that. Well, that is bad. Like that's as bad as you can get. So how can we do better? And like I said, call them on what they're probably doing. In a compassionate way, it can be done in a compassionate way. Like if they say hunting's better than factory farming, say, what did you have for lunch today? Was it from an animal you just killed? And I don't mean that in an antagonistic way, but it can be done in a way that's engaging in dialogue, because ultimately that's what I want to have with people is a dialogue. I'm not looking to be right, I'm looking to have a conversation. Does that help you with any of that? Does that help you? Because I do think they're compassionate people. You know, if I said to someone, I have a podcast episode called How to Talk to a Hunter or anyone else with whom you disagree. And one of the things I say in that episode is if I said to you, if you said, my father hunts, and I said, what a bastard, you said, whoa, that's my father. He's a good person, he's a good father, he's a good husband, he's a good friend, he does this thing I don't like, but that doesn't make up everything he is. He's probably a compassionate person in other ways, but it's desensitized, just like ours is. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So that's kind of just food for thought. Yeah, food for thought. Yes?
Hi, so you talked about time and how a lot of people use that as an excuse to not cook more vegan meals, and I definitely agree, but there are folks who literally work and they only have time to eat like McDonald's or fast food. So I guess my question is, how can we make the vegan movement more accessible to low-income and marginalized communities?
Well, fruits and vegetables are already accessible to those people. And again, that is not a bar that we should have. We cannot be persuaded that there are no consequences to saying that, like, well, they can only afford that. A lot of welfare programs, absolutely, and it's been changing, allow the food stamps to be used for fruits and vegetables and plant foods and grains, etc. So this idea that the only thing they can eat is crap, it's not true. So the food is already accessible to them. The food is in many ways accessible to them, and of course things are changing. But we have to understand that that's not okay. It's not like there's a huge cost to consuming the McDonald's. So it might not be cheap dollars wise, but there are huge costs environmentally, to their own health, right, to the animals themselves. So we need to stop talking about cost as if money is the only thing that we pay with. They're paying in so many other ways. So again, that's not a vegan's problem to solve. That's a food policy problem that we need to be involved in as citizens in the cities that we live in and make sure we're changing policies to make sure there's accessibility and make sure that advertising isn't going to low-income communities. We can be part of that. But that's not the vegan problem to solve. That's a bigger issue that I encourage all of us to be involved in. Does that make sense? Good. Good. Well, everybody, I'm here all day at my table, so come say hello, and thank you and have a wonderful